I used to be a venture capitalist, and I had to fundraise from pension funds. And I know that you were the leader, and I kind of follow these things and the whole movement of taking some of the states and saying, I'm not going to give my money to people that want to do ESG.
Yes,
And
yeah,
was I right? Was I right that you were the leader? I think you were the first one, correct?
you are correct. I was
Okay.
the first elected official actually in the country to divest our tax dollars from BlackRock, and we did a lot of other things around anti-ESG. One was, or specifically talk about a complicated issue around proxy voting. We created a new law around that. I'm sure you're familiar with that one. And we created the restricted financial institution list, which essentially said if you're going to boycott the fossil fuel industries, you are not going to be eligible to bid on financial services contracts with the state of West Virginia moving forward because there was a conflict of interest there. If you were actively trying to diminish the funds that were created by fossil fuels, at the same time managing those dollars that we have procured through coal, gas, and oil, well, there's a conflict of interest there. And so, look, they can continue to do that if they want, but they weren't going to do business with us because of that inherent conflict of interest. Certainly, those companies have a First Amendment right to expressive activity that's been defined by the United States Supreme Court. But we're also a free market participant, so we were able to go out and exercise that and stipulate and proviso how we would like to contract going forward.
With regards to the organization and obviously the thousands and thousands of people that are involved with the organization, so do you actually will you have a service or services, or are you talking to the young people and bringing them into the church, or what exactly
Yeah, yeah.
the
No,
TPUSA mean?
that's a great question. And so it's a lot of times people assume that because I'm part of TPUSA, that it is that our focus is on young people. And I would say that within Turning Point as a whole, that certainly is a major priority, and has been the focus for really since its inception, was this younger generation. What we are within the faith division, our predominant focus is pastors. So I have a team of about 40 staff members around the country, and growing. And they call upon pastors. And so they build relationship with church leaders. They help equip them. They get them to pastor summits. We train them. We build into them. If they are having a bad day, we say, call us. If they need help with something, we say, call us. If they're stuck and they can't figure out how to grow their church, give us a call. If you're fighting, some sort of ideological threat at your school board, if there's other things that are going on, give us a call. We want to help walk with you through the challenges that you're facing as a pastor, to help equip you in these areas. And we want to unite you with other pastors and believers in your region, that can help, support you in some capacity. And so that trickles down obviously to the younger generation. But my team,
Yeah.
within our division of TPUSA Faith, is very focused on the church. So we don't hold church services per se ourselves. I mean, we certainly put on events that we have worship and teaching at, with for pastor summits and conferences. We're looking at some events and maybe some tours for 2026 as we really continue this momentum. I would love to see our team go around the country and be able to encourage people and fill up some bigger spaces around the country to do that. But we believe that God has given the church as a what I call the last ditch effort to save the planet. And so we want to help come alongside of them and really equip them to be able to do just that, in their locations.
So I'll ask you the question again. I love this conversation, and I apologize if it's everywhere, but there's a method to my madness. So one of the biggest problems we had, I worked on the president's campaign in Nevada, and I got to speak before every one of these rallies and so on. But one of the biggest problems is get out the vote.
Mm.
Uh, and that's just well known. And of course, the Democrats always have an advantage because they have unions and they mobilize and so on and so forth. How do you mobilize? How do you get the young people out to vote? Because they're humans, and on Tuesday they're doing. If it snows, they might not want to go. So how do you do that?
Yeah, Turning Point has a very effective strategy with this, having the Super Saturdays, to get out the vote. You bring out some awesome speakers who young people want to hear from. They talk about the candidate, they talk about the mission, what's going on in America, how we can fix it, how we can involve them to fix it. And then after following, the speeches, we go door knocking right away. We'll have some snacks, some food, some water, and we went out on the trail. We did this in 2024. We did this in 2020, and it was very effective for getting people out there. But the reality is that it's a 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 strategy. GOP sucked at it before Trump. They'd have all these coalitions like Latinos, Republican Latino groups, or Blacks for the GOP, or whatever the case may be. But you only see or hear from those guys 4 to 5 months from the election, right? So the marketing strategy, being involved all the time around the clock, not just when you need their vote, is very critical. But getting people out, we've been telling influencers this all the time. It's great to get the likes, it's great to get the clicks, that's one thing. But using your platform to not only engage, but to motivate and inspire and mobilize is one of the biggest things that you do. And we try to do that all the time. Even though I'm taking sort of a hiatus right now and not on the road as much, I'm still pushing content from Turning Point USA, talking about events, right? That's happening up in New Jersey for this election coming up here very soon on the 4th. And they've got Jack Posobiec going out there, Cliff Maloney, a huge amount of conservative activists and speakers and supporters that are going to these events, and motivating and inspiring those people to go to the polls, because we can flip New Jersey, and the likelihood is growing every single day. And that's like I said, my home state, so it's close to home in that sense that we want to bring it back to red, because we've seen what good that can bring. And I think really too, it comes down to everything we just said, talking about messaging, strategy, relatability, and then also the inspirational part of that with getting those people out to the polls, and why it matters that their voice matters.
When I first, so I'm the very proud American, lived the American dream. My parents were legal immigrants to this country. And when I was 15, 16 is when I arrived to the US. People would say schools are about the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I'm a foreign kid, right? I just came, I'm French speaking. I'm like, these are not 3 R's.
Yeah.
Anyway, but to your point, also when I was running for governor, my first thing was going to be impose civics on high schools. People need to understand, kids need to be proud of this country. They need to be proud of the place they live in. They need to realize what an amazing place that is.
I totally agree with you. Civics education, but also just fundamentally talking to our children. And I think this is every parent's responsibility. You have to teach them to love their country. They live in the greatest country on earth, but if you don't teach them that, I can guarantee you they are going to be bombarded by people who are teaching them to hate it. The people who hate America are not shy about explaining why it's wrong and needs to be torn down. And they will reach your children. And so I think this education starts at home. I mean, we have to teach our children to love our country, that patriotism is good. We don't have to apologize for being Americans. And unfortunately, I think that's the attitude of a lot of people on the left right now. I actually think this coming year, the 250th birthday of our country, is a good opportunity for us to have a shared national purpose on this front. We have a lot of division in this country and a lot of disagreements, but can't we all agree that 250 years of America has left this world a much better place than had we not, engaged in this great American experiment? Of course, we should all agree on that. There'll be some radicals who won't, but I think a vast majority of Americans believe that and would rally around sort of a national conversation about American exceptionalism in our 250th year.
I agree, and I think someone like you is actually the ambassador for that, and of course the president and a lot of leaders. So Scott, I got here 1978 to 76, and
That's what I got here.
we both got here at the same time.
Yeah.
But everything you mentioned was so obvious to me. People were proud of their countries. I got invited to Thanksgiving, which I had no idea what it was. And it was like one of the most beautiful things. And we said, Merry Christmas and so on. What happened since I was 15 till today, since you were born till today, that people don't do that anymore? And it's almost you're insulting people by saying Merry Christmas.
Well, we still say Merry Christmas back home in Kentucky. I can assure you of that. I think over time, there were people in this country, and particularly on the left, who decided to stop fighting just about politics and start fighting about culture. And they started to look around American culture and they saw fault and they saw hate in everything. And they're hostile, I think, sometimes to people of faith. Because I think for people on the left, what they need you to believe is that they are the highest power and the highest authority in your life. Because when government or political people give you your rights, they can take them away from you. When you are a person of faith and you understand that your rights come only from God, you can't be bullied, you can't be shouted down. You know, you have confidence that your rights come from a higher power, something that judges the judges. That you're not answering to bureaucrats, you answer to God. And I think over time, a lot of people on the left became hostile to faith because faith is a direct threat to the idea that the state is the highest authority in your life, and there was conflict there. And I think what you're describing is that the left sort of over time became more and more captured by people that have this ideology that the state is our religion. Look at what's happening in our politics today. There are a lot of people that treat politics like it's a religion. They've replaced religion in their life with politics. And so they treat these things like transgender ideology or the climate cult or whatever. They treat these things with religious dogma up to and including if you don't fall in line and agree with me, you know, we're going to try to destroy you. And so I tend to think that that's part of it here. It's the idea that people replaced faith with politics. They replaced religion with politics. And it's all sort of in service of this idea that the state must be the highest authority in your life. I don't fundamentally believe that. And it's not what America was founded on.
Yeah.
You know, our rights come from God. This used to not be controversial, but now it is.
Exactly. You know, to your point, which very concerning to me is how politics has become religion, or the environment has become religion for some people. We've seen 2,000 years of how religions actually, you know, people will fight and kill for their religion. At least the
Yes.
Crusaders did it for a reason, and on and on. But today's left would do that because religion is, you know, that's the kind of intensity religion brings out of people. And again, I fought in a religious war when I was 15 against the PLO and the other side. I see how quickly that can happen. And so what you're saying is crucial. And I want to follow up on something else that you said, which is you said it really well. I'm going to use the term hand-to-hand combat, but you said it better. You said we need to fight at every level. But what worries me today is that after the special elections, we lost at every level. We lost at school boards even. And we need to be at this, like you said, dog catcher, school board, city council, commission, and on and on. So that's another thing where this pendulum is worrying me a little bit. So how do we get people to, you know, when COVID happened, when the boys and girls locker room happened, some parents pushed back, but I don't feel that this is now sustained. And that's what's worrying me a little bit. And how do we sustain it?
Well, this is what the purpose of campaigns are for. You know, I mean, we have campaigns and to try to inspire people and to try to convince people that they need to participate. It's certainly true that there'll be a smaller turnout in the midterm this year than there was in the presidential election. I think that's pretty common in American politics. But there are a lot of people out there who weren't all that political. They weren't all that involved. They didn't think of themselves even as conservatives or Republicans, but they were inspired to get involved 3 straight times for Donald Trump. And in some cases, you know, they would only vote for him. In fact, I think we left like 4 Senate races on the table in 2024 in states that Trump won, where people would come and vote for him and they would leave the rest of the ballot blank. So the next project of the Republican Party and the conservative movement has to be in talking to these people about why other conservatives are important, why other races are important, and why, you know, this isn't really just about a momentary part of our history where Donald Trump is our leader. It's about the future. You know, there will be people that come after Donald Trump, whether it's JD Vance or, you know, which I assume will be the nominee in 2028 and on and on and on. They need our support too, because they're going to pick up the battle right where Trump leaves off. You know, Trump's fighting the battle for the future of the West and the future of America today. But when he leaves office, the battle doesn't finish. And the other side is waiting and hoping that we will just sort of lay down or forget about it. And we have to convince these voters that we're not going to forget about it. And we're not going to let the legacy of fighting for our future fall by the wayside. So if I were running a campaign today, that's how I'd be trying to inspire people to stay involved. And of course, you have the issues of the day that will come and go, but there's something bigger at play here. And I do think sometimes people get a little numb to the day-to-day political issues, but some of the larger structural ideas about our culture, our lives, our world, what is the nature of our country? What does it mean to be an American today here in our 250th year? I think we could speak to some deeper patriotism that I think still exists in a lot of people, even those who aren't terribly politically engaged.
So let's talk about the war room, because and also we'll have to explain. Uh, so I'm gonna assume most of my, believe it or not, the people who watch the show, they've heard of Steve Bannon, but they have no idea, like you and I, exactly who he is and what he does and what the. But so tell us about a little bit about him, and then a little bit about your involvement with him and how that worked, because that must have been being in the you know in the middle of the action that was happening.
Oh yeah, certainly in the middle of the action, especially in 2020 when we talk about those COVID years and how important the war room was in 2020 and 2021 in the early days of after the stolen election, or as there was the whole controversy about that. We can get into that, but um, what attracted when I had met a mentor in this journey to get to Steve, essentially as my first real political opportunity. I had met a mentor who decided to take me under his wing and kind of teach me the ropes of politics, right? And he was a very seasoned operative, and worked at the highest levels, and I knew I was getting good advice and good teachings. And he said, and he asked me, he's like, who's your kind of favorite character in this right wing universe or Republican conservative universe? And I said Steve Bannon, and he said why? And my explanation at that time, somebody who never met Steve or anything, just kind of watched him, read some of his stuff, is one, Steve had such an insightful um, understanding of certain issues and was really willing to ask the tough questions about certain issues. And the issue that caught my eye is, I think during 2016, he goes on, I forget, Fox or something, and he kind of asks the question, why is there such a heavy concentration of Asian CEOs or Asian-born CEOs in Silicon Valley, right? And that's a serious question. Now, I knew as an Asian, right, or of someone of Asian descent, right, as an American of Asian descent, I knew what he was getting at, right? I think because Asians, South Asians, Chinese Indians, and a lot, they approach education just a little differently. That's more geared towards, especially this kind of like information space, maybe not to be so creative about it, but the rote memorization of it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think he understood that, and he was asking that question, and he was trying to make a larger point to the way American education system and the job market and the labor market is all connected and integrated, and how they might not be working with each other, right? And so, but the reaction to that was that he was a racist, right? And that he was asking a racist question, and that's when I saw that dishonesty and that unwillingness to approach that question that Steve was presenting, I knew that there was an issue, and that is something that deserves a real answer, especially in today's climate. So that's one thing. The other thing that attracted me to Steve is he wasn't like the other Republicans, right? He's very much a street fighter. He's very much raw and in your face and doesn't mince words when he doesn't need to. So he's very straight about it. As a New Yorker, I sympathize with that, right? Like I'm just straight to, I'll tell you how it is, right? And so I like that style. And so that's why he was my favorite. He was kind of, the street fighting, brainiac, right? And so I like that. I eventually get my mentor was actually one of his former business partners that I find out later, and he trains me to go work for Steve essentially. And then I go work for Steve, get that opportunity. And Steve is a machine, right? Like, the guy doesn't sleep. He eats, sleeps, breathes the stuff. He's working, talking to people 24/7. He's always on the move. And then he also tries to be as generous with his time as possible. Like, he goes and speaks to the small activists at their gatherings and their events and doesn't charge and things like that, right? And he tries to build the movement brick by brick over the air and through the ground. So what people should really look at Steve Bannon as is kind of MAGA's best or greatest community organizer. And he organizes this community mainly through the War Room, right, which I helped him build, and I understood kind of what his strategy and tactics was to build that up to eventually become that. He does it through the air and then through his own presence on the ground when he goes and speaks with these people, meets with these people. When you advertise him as a guest at your small event, you might attract double or triple the people than you usually expect, and now your organization has grown if you retain those people. That is a value that Steve comes and adds just by being there. And so that is kind of how he does it through the air and the ground. And he's MAGA's greatest kind of not only just community organizer who operationally makes it happen, but he's also the intellectual kind of vanguard or masthead of MAGA. And so that's what makes Steve special.
Okay, so let's jump right into it. So let's restore. Well, what is the goal? What are we restoring and why? And again, I probably know, but my audience might or might not understand what we mean here. And I think it's really important that they do, because I think your mission is crucial.
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So when it comes to what are we restoring, we're obviously restoring our country and more broadly Western civilization, because I am very concerned about what's going on in Europe, in other Anglosphere countries like Australia. It's I do have like kind of a civilizational sense of consciousness, and it's not just that America, but I care about my country more. And given that America is the superpower, given that a lot of European countries are basically kind of vassals or protectorates of us, and I think that's not ideal. And I definitely support Trump's push to get European countries to spend more on defense and and try to inject a little bit of life back into them. But when it comes to really what we're restoring in America, there's basic stuff like law and order on the streets. There's border security. Donald Trump's done a lot on both of these issues. Look forward to seeing more. But there's also like the bigger philosophical perspective on this, which is that America over the course of the 20th century and unfortunately continuing into the 21st century has undergone some profound changes to the point where, Christopher Caldwell, he wrote an excellent book on civil rights law and the changes in the 60s. Basically, it was almost as if a new country were created. Now, this isn't to say that everything about the pre-civil rights, pre-60s America was good, but it's important to understand that a lot has changed. A lot has changed. And as a result of that, there have been some good changes, there have been some bad changes. So we really have to look at the changes over the course of the 20th century that were negative, that got us to where we are today. You don't have to support Jim Crow to recognize that civil rights law is used to discriminate against whites, men, Christians, so on and so forth. Some of these laws, more broadly, these social movements were, at least in theory, designed to prevent anyone from being discriminated against based on their race, ethnicity, gender. But in practice, that's not at all how it played out. So there's the immigration. There's this whole idea of America just being a country that is defined like that only has moral value in the extent to which it repudiates its dark, bigoted past. And again, there's stuff in the past that I certainly wouldn't call for today, like slavery as one thing. But at the end of the day, there are conservative ways of dealing with these issues, and then there are liberal ways. And the liberal ways have been the prevailing ones, which are you basically just have to, tear down the statues of great American men. Why? Because they were patriarchal white slave owners. And even if they didn't own slave, well, they're still just racist white guys or whatever. So we're a nation that has essentially been turned on itself in the sense that we are many of our institutions, a large share of the country has been turned on our past, on our identity, on our culture, and it's just really not a good place to be. So there's a lot more I could say about restoring order, but generally speaking, it's about recognizing that we've lost a lot about what America made America great to begin with, but also recognizing that we can't recreate the America of the 1800s or the 1700s, and so we have to find some kind of balance between the old America and the new.
My next question is, tell me what it's like now. Okay, so when President Trump was running a year and a half ago, I got to speak every time he came to Nevada. I was one of the speakers before him, and the whole process of Secret Service, and then when you get in, and how they all these things, and then of course the excitement of, oh my gosh, here it is, it's happening. So tell me what it's like to get the duty to be on Air Force One, Trump One.
Air Force One, yeah.
But doing something, you weren't just a guest, right? Tell me what you were doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me what's that like, so again, nothing that's going to help our adversaries or anybody who doesn't like us, but just the experience.
Well, when I was on Trump Force One, it was before the DOW, so I can speak to this no problem.
Okay.
But it was a few years back. I want to say it was 2022, maybe late 2022, going into 2023. And we were in Ohio, and we were filming a video for a creator that I was working for at the time. And we knew that we were going to have the opportunity to go aboard Trump Force One, which is something that I'll never forget. Something that I'll never forget the feeling that I had when I was stepping up onto the plane. Say what you want about President Trump. There's never been a president like him. There's never been a human being like him, quite like him. He's very unique in his nature and who he is. And so to be in his proximity, to be within his plane and around his people, it's breathtaking. Everything that he does is breathtaking. Just look at what he's done with the Oval Office and the White House in general. He's made it look gorgeous. So in that, following suit to that, his plane looks gorgeous. On the inside, everything's gold. The seatbelts are gold. The trim around the coaster for your cup is gold. When you sit in the plane, you have the little air thing that blows air on you. All gold. Everything's gold. And you're sitting there, and you take off, and you just get to walk around and talk to the president and whoever else is on the airplane. And a few things that I'll never forget. One, McDonald's was the only food on the plane. Those bags, you looked at the back of the plane, there's just bags and bags of McDonald's. As you know, the president loves McDonald's. He has his Diet Coke with him. But a couple stories that I'll never forget. One, I was just standing there in a couple feet behind the president. And he's watching the TV, and he's watching James Brown, and he's watching Elvis. And specifically, James Brown was singing. And, James Brown, he's got that hair, and he's so extra with it. And President Trump, I'll do an impression right now. For President Trump, he goes, "Wow, that guy's got great hair." And then he looks back at me. He goes, "Just like that guy, he's got great hair." And I'm just standing there, and I'm like, "Thank you, Mr. President." And so that was something I'll never forget. And that was my first ever interaction, right? That was interaction number one. And then as the plane was landing, again, I was there just as the video guy. I was there to film. As the plane was landing, everybody had got up, kind of in a half circle around the president, who was sitting in his chair, and he was shaking everybody's hands. And in my head, this may have been inappropriate for my position, but in my head, I'm like, this is the opportunity that I have to shake the president's hand aboard his plane. First time ever, right? This is the opportunity. So once it got, towards my direction, I decided I was going to kind of butt in between two people. I was not within the circle. I was outside of it. I pushed my way through to the circle and put my hand out. The president shook my hand. I said, "Sir, it's such an honor to be aboard your plane. I'm here filming, and thank you so much." And he goes, "Wow, that's a great job." And then and that was my experience on the plane. And then we landed at 2, 3 a.m. The president to this day is the hardest working person I've ever witnessed. We were at that event at Ohio. It was freezing cold, so much fun. flew all the way back. He didn't get back to Mar-a-Lago till at least 3 a.m., and then got up the next morning and probably did it all again. The man is a hard worker. I was exhausted, the ripe age of like 21 at the time. I was beat from that day, and he looked completely unfazed. I'll never forget it.
Okay, so then what's next on your agenda as far as the projects that you're working on, the things that you think are important? Because we hit on clothes, which is obviously very important, but there's also decorum. I mean, I've researched you, and I find you as a oasis of sanity in an otherwise really sometimes, for me at least, depressing world. With all of the polarization and social media, and there are no more filters. So take us how we're going to become polite and well behaved and caring for each other.
Well, listen, I agree with you completely. It's extreme. I mean, it's a really sad world. It's very toxic, especially on the internet. It's extremely toxic. It's just so sad. It's not good at all. I mean, it's really bad for your mind, it's bad for your mind, bad for your heart. What I do beyond clothes, I write about culture, I write about life, and I write about life from, I'm really interested in families because I have families. I have 3 kids, and I have a wife and family. So I write about having a family a lot. And
bless them
I write
all.
about, God bless them all. Absolutely.
Bless everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. I think about how do we, and this is very possible, but instead of thinking so much about or commenting on political discourse, the discourse of the day that's going to be forgotten like that tomorrow, and getting all wrapped up in the stuff that one cannot control, because many things one cannot control, people need to instead focus on what does it mean to live a life that is meaningful? What does it mean to me a life that is meaningful to me and that is worthwhile and that is, what is the good, And I think that involves bringing your sphere in a little bit, making the choices, making the changes, making the impacts where you can, whether that's your kids, whether it's your wife, and if you're not married, with your friends. And it's about, instead of losing yourself constantly in the digital world that's pulling you 5,000 miles away where you can't touch anything, start thinking about the fact that you have a limited time on Earth. Who knows when you will die? You might die. Do you want to die scrolling on the phone and being mad? Or do you want to try to build a world that you love and that you believe in? And that can be different for different people. And that's not saying it should be fantastical and everything is a dreamland, because life isn't a dreamland. But there's a realism. I really love what I'm really interested in the age of false internet reality is sort of extreme realism, actual reality, real family life, real just truth and honesty, having the courage to be that way. But I think if we get all of the weird signals of social media that push us either into anger or push us into falseness or push us into just believing in stuff that we don't even believe in, or screwing up our expectations, but instead returning to caring about that which we can care about, doing what we can do, controlling what we can control, and trying to live a life that is good, that I think is a path to sanity. That's a pathway to sanity that many people, no matter where you are, where you're coming from, what your family situation is, what your socioeconomic situation is, you can all do that. We can all do that. And I'm really interested in exploring that and writing about that experience and sort of all of that, because some of, yeah.
And how are you doing that? Because I spend most of my time, unfortunately, trying to bring everybody into the middle, which is what you're doing. But how do you do it? What's your, is it writing things? Do you have a show? Just and go ahead and advertise everything you want. This is the time.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So, okay, so wow, this is really interesting. I love talking about this. So when I talk about style, often I talk about prescription. A clear prescription. I say, do this. I write I have a Substack called The Fitting Room, where I send a style memo every single morning, 5 days a week, where it's basically, you get one every single morning and you can read it in a couple minutes, but it's different aspect of style. Do this, try this, do this. This is what you should do. This is what you shouldn't do. Just everything. This is a great deal here. This is on sale. All sorts of stuff. This is prescriptive. And I like doing, and I work with individuals for style consulting as well, and that's prescriptive as well. But then with my other work about life, it's less prescriptive, and I really view myself as more of an artistic side of things. You know, I shoot a lot of film, I write a lot of stories, I write a lot of columns, I write a lot of essays. They're not analysis on guess what, this is what you need to know about the latest thing happening in the horse race. No, it's not that. It's about life. And it's not saying you should do this, not saying you're better if you do this, but instead, and I think that this is, so I come from a music background. That's what I studied in college, and that's what I did for a while before I do what I do now. So I've always been in the arts and creative stuff, and it's really actually interesting. I talk to my wife about this. I've only had jobs where my job is to make people feel things. And it's very interesting because I've never like worked for like other things. All of my jobs involve like making people feel things. You know, music makes you feel things. You want people to feel certain things. When you write something, you want people to feel certain things. So what I do in my writing about life and my writing about modernity is I try to create a world in which it opens up a way for people to feel and reflect and connect with the world, or introspect, or look at their own lives, or look at the world, just to feel something in a way that is not related to the current discourse reality, that is more timeless or evergreen. That while it is about modern life, it is not related to anything that is happening or going on right now. It's just life in general. And I think that people are aching for that because in the age of polarization, in the age of hyper politicalness, people, all they can think about is politics. And all they can think about is like, I'm this way, they're that way. Instead, what you need to do when you're creating something, when you're making art, is what you're trying to do is you are taking, essentially, not to get too deep in the weeds here, you're taking a step and trying to have the courage to open up an avenue, put oneself on the line, to open up the place so other people with less courage can feel something, essentially. You know, that's kind of
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Yeah.
And that is what I try to do with my writing, with my columns that are often like, you know, they're not saying you should do this. It's instead a sort of an opening. It's trying to open the gate. And I write for Michigan Enjoyer. I have a column there. I write for The Blaze. I have my Substack, Modern Lives, that I write for as well. I have a book coming out with a collection of essays as well. I'm hoping that will be out in, I don't know, a few months.
What's the name?
And
What's the name of
so
the book? What's the
Modern
name of the book?
Lives.
Oh, okay.
Modern Lives. And
Yeah.
so I'll have a collection of about 25 essays, I believe. That's what we'll have there. And so what I do with my other work is that it's trying to create an opening, open the space for people to feel in a non-political sense. And I know that sounds so simple, but it's there's not a lot of places like that today,
Yeah.
you know?
You're right.
Even if it's television or anything, it's all inflected by that. And so that's what I try to do, is try to open that space. And whether it's through film, whether it's through photography, film photography, whether it's through writing, whether it's through anything, that's what it is.
And how have you been how have you avoid being pigeonholed, or have you been pigeonholed? Because the fact that you are wholesome already is putting you in
Yeah.
a category that
Right.
10% of the population is not happy with, right? You have a beautiful family, you have a beautiful wife. Oh, there you go, you know, patriarch,
Right,
or whatever
right.
you want to know.
Right,
So how do you
right.
get yourself out of that? Because I think we need to reach everybody, not just
This is
the reachable. You know, you need to take
this
some bitter
yes.
people and say, you know, it's great what my wife does on Friday night. You know,
Yes.
but by the way,
Yes.
I very quickly, I had a glucose monitor on once, and I'm a Catholic, but I had the actual dinner. I had the actual bread, the shalat.
Yeah.
Dude, you don't want to know what happens to your glucose numbers when you eat that bread. Okay,
I do not. I
trust
do
me.
not.
Trust me. Okay, take
You
some
do
cinnamon
not.
or something after.
I'm
No, that's
sure.
it.
No, I'm actually really sure. No, this is a super good question. This is a super good question because not only do you get pigeonholed, but you then can get, you know, a lot of people get trapped by audience capture, you know, where they have an audience where then they start tailoring what they believe or what they say for the audience. So this is a really, really good question. And I thought about this a lot. So as for the first one, not to get pigeonholed, So you'll never be able to satisfy everyone, but you can satisfy more people by, like you said, like you said. So they see you, they say, okay, you're wholesome, you have this, blah, blah, blah. Let's say they go to this place, say, well, look, he's got all this perfect stuff. What you do, and this is kind of a key part of my aspect of realism, you don't say it's perfect. You say something, you write something that is real, that is true. I'm not creating a fantasy here, but I have this is my I have these struggles. I suck at money. I suck at this. I suck at whatever. You know what I mean? Like these sorts of things. All of a sudden, this is human, by the way, because we all have struggles. We all have things. No one is good at everything. Everyone
Yep.
has problems. But opening that, doing that, that is what, first of all, that's just being approachable. It's being a normal human being. But this is also a key part to creating some sort of art, because if you are creating art in which you are never vulnerable, that is not art. It's really just sort of a kind of propaganda. It really, you know? And so a key aspect to not creating propaganda is creating more of a complex sort of message, you know? And that's where you get into art, or a complex feeling, or allowing the space, the territory where people can be complex. So a way to do that is essentially just being real. And the thing is, people have a hard time being real because it takes courage to be real. People, if you notice, so many people will write about whatever online, and it's always like, look how great I am. Look how perfect this is. Look at all this. No, no, no. That is not real. I know there's something there. And so that closes people off. But a way to then not pigeonhole is to essentially be real, is realism. And when you portray that realism, whether it's your garage that is a mess, because my garage is a perpetual mess, or whether it's something as simple as just like, or allowing yourself to feel, it's allowing yourself to, it's to open, as I said, you open the gate for other people to feel. And when you do that, you can only do that by essentially being vulnerable to some extent. But
Yep.
that is then a way that you connect with people. And as for audience capture, a way to avoid audience capture, and I've thought about this a lot, is I think about it like this. You sometimes have to take your elbows and like jerk them out like this. You know, imagine you're in a crowd and people are getting you, and you go, get back. You know what I mean? You kind of got to do that. But
Yeah.
that's what you have to do. And sometimes that means being like, so this is how audience capture happens for people. They have a world that is like this big. This is how their world is. But then they notice that their audience is over here. So they close their world like this to them. So they only portray this. Now, you can avoid that by just always doing this, you
Yep.
know? But if you ever feel yourself, and this is to anyone who's creating something, if you feel yourself closing your world for audience capture, no, you have to open that up and jerk your elbows like this. And this gives you territory to write, to speak, to create as freely as you want. Because as soon as you start getting that audience capture like this, you're not free anymore. You are then captured by people and you're trying to create things for them. And you're no longer able to even maybe be vulnerable or maybe create things to allow people to feel. And so that's the sort of way that I think about it. And I think that realism, the courage to have realism or to portray realism is that's actually what I really think people ache for in our era of social media performance. You know, and
But
it does yeah.
it's great you're saying this about yourself, but I really believe it applies to, again, everybody inside that bell curve. And I'm glad you're actually articulating it, because I want people that are watching our show today to say, you know what? I want them to go with this motion. I want to go,
Yes.
I'm seeing this. No, 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 no. We're doing this. You know, Thanksgiving, grandma didn't come because of she voted whatever way she voted. Well, Christmas,
Yeah.
grandma's coming. You know,
Yes.
I mean,
Yes. Yes. You know, that's perfect that you brought this up about holidays, about Christmas, about Thanksgiving. I just wrote a column about this, about how holidays. So the whole thing started. I talked about how holidays are hard, right? So why people often have this feeling, and we all have this feeling where we say, oh, the Thanksgiving got ruined, the meal got ruined because someone made a snide comment. Then someone made another snide comment. Then it got a little fight about this. And then this happened tense. Then things got quiet at the table. Then it kept drifting into this. And next thing you know, you got all these problems. And then your mother or your grandmother is upset because she just wants everybody to be happy for 1 hour, blah, 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 all this sort of stuff. And then it spirals and spirals. Everyone has experienced stuff like this. And why is this? It's because holidays are the most important days. We think of them as being the most important days. We think of them being so important because they're not every day. So we build them up and we want them to be perfect.
Mhm.
And when they're not perfect, that disappointment is even harder than if a random Tuesday wasn't perfect. We say, all we needed was just this one day for it to be perfect. And we all have this sort of stress, but it doesn't happen. But the way, I think, is to accept that no holiday's going to be perfect. Nobody's going to be perfect. But what really matters is the fact that you're there, or the fact that you're together. And maybe we need to grade ourselves on a curve, Maybe instead of it being an A is an A, really maybe more of a B minus is an A, to be perfectly honest with you, And
Yeah.
I think if we can live in that as a family together, that allows us to feel less unnecessary stress about the fact that the holiday was ruined for whatever, and I think that that's somehow related to all of this realism. Our holidays are not going to be a Hallmark movie. Every single dinner is not going to be perfect.
Yeah.
I have kids, we eat dinner together all the time. And guess what? Sometimes it really stinks, to be honest. It's really hard to have dinner every single night with 3 kids, trying to teach them manners, prepare stuff, and have it. I have not had a relaxing dinner with my wife in so long, but what is important is having dinner as a family. And so there's this thing and that's that sort of realism. And I think that's, I guess, what I like doing, is trying to bring that human realism to the digital space.